Welcome to CivilNet. My guest today from Pasadena, California is Professor Donald Miller, who's a professor of religion at the University of Southern California. Don Miller, together with his wife Lorna Turian Miller, were also among the very first who embarked on a serious, in-depth project to interview Armenian genocide survivors. From there, and after the publication of their book, Survivors, Professor Miller and his wife became very engaged in documenting the Rwandan genocide, which took place just 20 years ago, just this month. Professor Miller, Don, thank you for joining us on CivilNet.
I'm delighted.
Don, you tell us, how did you make the leap from the Armenian genocide to the Rwandan, or is that really not a leap?
Well, when Lorna and I finished writing Survivors, and it was published in 1993, I figured I had paid my debt for polluting the bloodlines, the pure Armenian bloodlines of the Turian clan. And I thought I would move on actually to my specialization in the sociology of religion. But in November of 2001, there was a major conference on genocides of the 20th century held in the capital of Rwanda. And because there were very few survivors who could have attended that conference, my wife and I were invited to represent the Armenian genocide. And to make a fairly long story short, what occurred is that after Lorna told the story of her father, who out of a family of 9, only he and his sister survived, there were a group of orphans who had formed an association. They were all caring for their own siblings who had survived the genocide. And they gathered around Lorna, and they wanted to tell us their stories of what happened in their genocide. And that created a bond which has endured to this day.
You've just returned from there.
Yes, actually, we were there for the 20th commemoration of the genocide. And we met with what we now call our kids, because a lot of these orphans, even though many of them have now married and have children, they address us as dear parents. And so I've actually been there 16 different times since 2001.
That's more than once a year. And Don, in your role, not as parent necessarily in this case, but as scholar, I'm sure there is a lot to talk about, but can we please specifically talk about the two aspects of post-genocide life that are still hugely problematic for Armenians, and I imagine for Rwandans, but perhaps in a different way. One, of course, is acknowledgement, recognition, and the other is reconciliation. How are those two processes going? Let's talk first about acknowledgement. Now, the Tutsi minority-led rebels won this war, is that right?
Yes, that's correct. And I want to just give you one anecdote. In the capital city, there is a memorial to the 1994 genocide against Tutsis. And in that memorial, there's also a wall that commemorates the Armenian genocide. But during the last several years, actually, the Republic of Turkey, various government officials, have tried to force the Rwandans to remove that wall. And so denial continues even in Rwanda against the Armenian genocide. But in the case of the genocide against the Tutsis, actually, there is very little denial. It was a genocide that was portrayed on television. Many nations around the world have acknowledged that there was a genocide that claimed at least 800,000 lives, maybe as many as a million.
And in what time frame?
This was in a very short period. In 100 days, beginning on April 7th, 1994, the slaughter started. And actually, one interesting parallel to the Armenian genocide is that many Tutsis fled churches, and perhaps half of the deaths that occurred were actually in churches. This was a genocide that involved Christians killing their fellow Christians. And what happened is Tutsis would flee to their churches. Then the killers, as they're oftentimes still referred to, would go to these churches. They might throw grenades after actually locking the doors to the churches so no one could get out. And after they had stunned those who were inside, sometimes by the thousands, they would then go in and with machetes and other kinds of blunt instruments, they would kill everyone who was inside.
The parallels and the sense of impunity that must reign in an environment like that is amazing. Over 3 months, 1 million people. And today, the victims are those who run the government. And what happened to the process of punity, punishment, holding people responsible?
Well, one of the first of all, I should say that Rwanda, in August of 1994, when the genocide ended, was really a completely failed state. There were no institutions that were functioning at that point. Actually, about 3/4 of the population was displaced in one way or another or killed. And so it was important to recreate the court system, all of the different government offices, and also there was the International Criminal Court for Rwanda that was created in a country next door, Tanzania, in Arusha. And that actually, although it's been a great expenditure, over $3 billion, has tried what we call the Category 1 criminals who planned the genocide. But also, there have been what are referred to as gacaca courts. These were courts that really were at the village level. They were, in essence, trials and courts that were held on the grass, oftentimes under trees. And perhaps as many as 2 million people in Rwanda during the last 10 years have been involved in those trials.
And as a consequence of all that, then the process of acknowledgement does or doesn't become easier. Obviously, you can't deny it in the same way, but actually acknowledging responsibility to the point that the other side accepts it and you can move on, in the face of all of that, does that become easier?
Well, in these gacaca courts, prisoners, and there were about 100,000 people who were put in prison at the end of the genocide in August 1994.
From which side? From the victim side or from the perpetrators?
From the perpetrator side. In these courts, they were allowed to actually confess. And this was very important for the survivors that were left, because through these courts, they oftentimes were able to find out where their loved ones had been buried. Because, of course, a huge problem in a genocide of that scope is just dealing with the bodies. So Tutsis who were killed were put in trenches, in mass burials. And in these gacaca courts, when someone confessed, they also oftentimes were able to say, and here's where your loved ones were buried. And so currently, there are hundreds and thousands of cases where survivors have been able to exhume the bones of their loved ones almost in a ritual manner. They have washed these bones and they have reburied them. So actually at this memorial site in Kingali, there are about 250,000 victims, Tutsis, who have been reburied. And also, there are memorials all over the country where victims have also been buried. But on your point about reconciliation, one thing that occurred very quickly after the genocide is that there were laws that were instituted that said we're no longer going to make distinctions between Tutsis and Hutus, Hutus being the perpetrating group. Instead, we are all Rwandans. And that has been enforced by the government, and it's been extremely important in being able to create an atmosphere in which reconciliation can occur.
And this imposition by the government is working, in fact, in real life on the ground, or is it really a declaration up high and doesn't have that much to do with real life yet?
Well, one of the major differences between the genocide against Tutsis in Rwanda and the Armenian genocide is that, of course, Armenian survivors were deported and no longer lived in Turkey. But in the case of the Tutsi survivors, they still live intermingled with those who perpetrated the genocide against them. So on the surface, there is reconciliation. But one thing that we have asked survivors that we've interviewed, and I should say we've now interviewed about 260 survivors, Tutsi survivors, is we've said, could you marry a Hutu? And the answer almost inevitably is no, we could not do that. On the other hand, Tutsis and Hutu go to school together. They tend to live together relatively peacefully. And perhaps the adage that time heals is accurate. But one thing we focused a lot on is just the issue of trauma, PTSD, that occurred after the genocide. And
post-traumatic stress disorder.
Exactly. And I think for many Tutsis, actually, there is a healing process, although we attended, as previously mentioned, the major commemoration ceremony on April 7th, just several weeks ago. And during that commemoration in a large stadium, there were dozens, if not hundreds, of people who fainted, who screamed, who were carried out and taken to waiting ambulances. And that had also happened at the 10th commemoration when we were present. And so I guess one thing to be said is that during the 100 days of commemoration that happen annually in Rwanda, survivors oftentimes still experience a great deal of trauma. And yet I think actually there is a healing process that's occurring.
I'm almost embarrassed to stop at this point because I think this is one of those topics that we simply don't talk about enough. But perhaps we can talk to you again near the end of this 3-month period that is going to be commemorated and talk some more about the parallels, the differences, the memories, almost the badge of honor that we genocide victims feel we have the right to go around with. So all I want to say at this point is thank you, Professor Don Miller, University of Southern California, professor of religion who has now become a scholar of, I was going to say specialist, but even that word I can't use, a scholar of both the Armenian genocide and the Rwandan genocide.
Thank you, Salpi.
And thank you for following us on CivilNet.